Welcome to the Unexceptional Moms podcast. This is episode 27. Today we're going to be talking about learning disabilities, identifying the challenges, and how we work through them. I'm Erin Lorraine.
And I am Ellen Stumble, and our guest today is Robin McAvoy, and she is one of the authors of the book, Child Decoded. So we're going to be talking with her. She is a developmental neuropsychologist. So it's really exciting that we get to talk to an expert about some issues that some of our kids deal with every day. And before we get started, the freebie this time, which is really exciting, it's the first chapter of the book, and it's written by Marika Jones. Did I say the name right, Robin?
You did.
Good. And she tells the story of her son, CJ. So it's CJ's story, kind of giving background of what the book is about, right?
Yeah. The opening story is really to let you know sometimes learning is complex. And a child can seem perfectly capable and then really struggle in school. And then the story of trying to find their way through those struggles and finding towards probably the middle more than the end, that there were things they could do really deep in the child's system of neurology that really straightened things up at the top and made things much easier for them to cope with.
So if you want the freebie, you can go to ellenstumble.com/episode 27, and that's the number 27. ellenstumble.com/episode 27, bright orange button that is going to say, yes, send me CJ's story. So click on that and you're going to get the freebie. So let's dive in and let's talk about some learning disabilities, shall we?
Where are we starting?
Where would you like to start?
Well, I think the interesting thing, or what I really appreciate about the approach that you have, is the whole idea of a holistic approach. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a really good idea to talk about what does that even mean, because I think I'm familiar with the medical approach and maybe the medicinal approach, but what is a holistic approach?
And holistic means a lot of things to a lot of people. And I sort of threw that in to say, let's look at the whole child and let's never separate mind from body and separate our different systems as if, that your sensory system is different from your cognitive system. They all interact with each other. So in our book, of how do we unravel all these different contributors that may be a part of your child's presentation and then treat at each of those levels. So an example would be a child with an attention deficit disorder. If you pick apart things, you find that this child A, is very sensitive to noise, very sensitive to tactile input. So he's distracted in the classroom because he has a lot of things going on around him that he can't filter. And to treat that just as a simple attention problem when you don't treat the sensory wouldn't help. Child B may have eczema and may never sleep well, and his attention issues maybe due to something different. So let's make sure we're treating the whole child and not just something we see at the top.
Which, even as you're saying that, and Erin, I don't know if you feel that way too, but I'm thinking, so if I have a child with ADHD, I focus just on the ADHD, and maybe my child is not sleeping well, and I think of it as a completely separate component. So You're kind of saying it actually all kind of fits together.
Yeah, and the earlier diagnostic manual, you were not allowed to diagnose attention deficit disorder until you ruled out sleep disorder. And now it's not even part of it.
Interesting.
And that people have moved away from remembering to look deeply at what's going on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I tell people, you look at a child with certain issues, we may find a number of what I call 10%ers. Diet will influence this by 10%. Sleep will influence this by 10%. The amount of activity they get and exercise they get will influence this by 10%. There may not be a single answer, but you may find yourself, I tell people, if we can stack 4 or 5 10%ers up and get 50% improvement, that's a big jump.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
That is really interesting. So how does a parent even start You know, if let's say, your child has sensory processing disorder, ADHD, how do you start? What are the steps, I guess?
Yeah, that is a really hard thing to do. Parents feeling it's really overwhelmed by their presentation, mostly if the teacher is calling, the school is calling. Okay, things aren't working. We don't know what you're doing. Yeah, just come get him. Yeah, those sorts of things are very overwhelming. Yeah, the just come get him is a really hard one. We put in a checklist. So you start actually the book with a checklist. And to help you sort out what might be relevant. Like, there's a speech language component that we hadn't fully realized. The reason he's not paying attention is because paying attention didn't help. He didn't understand what he was supposed to do. So try to treat an attention problem when really you're dealing with a problem understanding language. Let's see if we can sort that out. So the checklist is, all right, do we have a little speech and language and some sensory and our attention issues? Do we have stomach aches? Do we only eat white foods? Do we not move very much? What are the factors that might be contributing to this? And then you can go to those chapters in particular and read through them. So there may be chapters like maybe no speech and language issues come up. And you can skip that chapter or just look at it in your free time. But we're trying to give you some starting points. And then from there, go to those chapters, and then they'll cover some treatment approaches that might be helpful.
Wow. Now, one thing that I think I appreciated, and you mentioned that in some of the emails that we've had back and forth as we talked about talk points, that what you want, the whole purpose of this book is to help parents find treatments that can complement what they're already doing, or some alternatives of things that could possibly help if they feel like what they're doing is just not really accomplishing much.
Yes, I went down that road in my professional career because I did have parents coming in who were doing everything they were supposed to do in terms of standard of care in Western medicine, working with a good psychiatrist, working with a psychologist, working with a speech therapist, and they still needed a little bit more. There was still sometimes needed a lot more. And so that's when I started exploring where might we go with nutrition and sleep and sensory processing, and really digging down underneath and finding out what we could work. Once again, can they add a little bit? They may not be the fix, but they might add 10 or 20% to the picture. And so I think that component, yes, complementary. I just felt we had to go there when I found so many parents who were doing everything they were supposed to be doing.
What do you mean by nutrition? Like if they don't have a good diet, or?
I think if you will run into some kids who live off of macaroni and cheese and earn straight A's. And so you can say, well, diet doesn't matter then because that kid's got straight A's and he lives off of macaroni and cheese. But then you'll find another child where you really realize that getting enough protein or avoiding certain foods. If you have a child with celiac disease and they are unidentified, well, when you get gluten out of their diet, they'll often feel so much better. And there's some children who have just developed sensitivities. If I have a child with a lot of allergies, environmental allergies, we will often want to consider food allergies, trying to get a good allergist in there who can explore food for them, because we can make a difference. I find some children on dairy are foggy, just foggy. And in fact, that's in CJ's story. And it took him a long time as a young man to reconcile dairy makes him foggy, and he does not think well on it.
Right.
So that sort of nutrition is highly individual, though. Even the more well-controlled studies in the medical journals, it's this child, maybe dairy is not good for them. This child really needs to stay off of food dyes. There's never, or rarely is there a simple answer, just do this for every child and our problems are over.
But the foundation of all of that is a well-balanced diet. So do you...
Yes.
Go
I
ahead.
think you start with a well-balanced diet.
Right.
Is your child getting some protein in the morning? Are we avoiding certain things? And then, but after that, like you can have, I mean, whole grains are part of a well-balanced diet. But if you have celiac disease or a gluten sensitivity, you're going to have to pull out the wheat and the barley and the rye.
But I'm thinking about a kid with autism who only eats white foods.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that can be very challenging for some families.
It is very challenging, and we do talk a bit about that in the chapter about autistic spectrum disorders, as well as in the nutrition and biomedical chapters. It's hard to shift a diet in a child who's extremely rigid, and you can't ever parent shame on that one. People are doing the best they can. You know, it's we know it's hard, but we also think we can do some things to try.
Absolutely.
You know, and give some suggestions and try to move slowly. Even when I've got kids who are more amenable and can understand what we're trying to ask of them, I usually tell the parent, just say we're trying this for 2 weeks. Not forever, just 2 weeks. And that feels like a reasonable goal, and that might be enough time to get some things out of their system. And then at the end of 2 weeks, have a little gluten fest and see what happens. Right. I've had parents take kids off the dyes for a week and then call me up and say, oh yeah, we gave him a red popsicle. My husband said, no more red popsicle.
No.
He was in a tantrum, full-blown tantrum within 10 minutes. You know, and his face got flushed, his cheeks got red. When you take off, sometimes you can see the impact of something.
Yeah.
You know, and I find this fascinating because when one of my daughters started seeing a therapist, a counselor, one of the first things that they asked us was actually to take a food sensitivities test. And I decided that everybody in my family should take it. And we all ended up taking the food sensitivities test. And Erin remembers because I shared with her the results, and we were coming to her house and she was like,
how do I feed you?
Yeah. But it was really interesting because like for one of my daughters and I, white potatoes came as a top high sensitivity food. I didn't know. And quite honestly, I didn't feel like I had any stomach issues. You know, like I would have never thought that I had any food sensitivities at all.
Yes. Yeah.
And it came that I had really high sensitivities to certain foods. And I mean, that's how I discovered high sensitivity to gluten and high sensitivity to dairy.
Yeah, gluten and dairy are tough on systems if you've ever had any gut issues. And we eat it so often that this is your normal. There's a lot of people diagnosed with celiac disease who are surprised when they come off gluten that they didn't know you could feel that good. They just, their whole lives, this was their normal, and they didn't know their normal was not that great. And we're very surprised at how well they felt. Do you feel a difference off of gluten and dairy?
I feel it when I have it, which is not good.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I was someone who would have said, I feel so much better. But when I tried to eat it again, I did not feel good at all.
Yeah.
And for two of my kids, one of them, she would wake up every morning and she would say that she had a tummy ache. And we always told her it's because it's the more she was hungry. Yeah. You know, like she would wake up every morning with a tummy ache and said, oh, it's because you're hungry. And once we removed the gluten and dairy, guess what? She does not wake up with a tummy ache anymore.
Yeah. We had the same thing with Anya. Anya has Down syndrome, and she has celiac disease and also cannot have dairy, or she's in the bathroom for 24 hours straight. But she used to at every meal go, my belly hurts. And now we know it did hurt. We just thought she was being dramatic.
Yes.
Yeah. And you don't realize that also affects your cognition and availability for learning. And in some kids, it's very clear. They feel much less foggy off of dairy. Gluten, I think, just gives a general discomfort. But I have kids who get foggy on dairy, and they just don't think very clearly. But you don't know till you come off, because you mostly with a child, say with Down syndrome, it's like, well, you're expecting a cognitive problem. And so people aren't thinking of how you might be able to influence and optimize your child's development, and you still can. It's very worthwhile to look into these contributing factors and put your child in the best place for learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that it is true that our kids with Down syndrome are they do have an intellectual disability, but other contributing factors that are making learning harder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you have to not define a child by their diagnosis, where I think you can still say, how do I optimize this child's development and help them be the best person they can be, help them use their strengths to their best. And I think we're still finding out more. I know that research on Fragile X is finding that there's a problem breaking down a certain protein. I think I know people who believe that more and more we're going to understand the chromosomal differences are influencing down at the digestive level as well as at the cognitive level, and it's at all sorts of levels. So don't think there's nothing to be done at those levels, but we don't know exactly what to do with it.
Which I think it's interesting because, Erin, what are the numbers when it comes to Down syndrome and celiac? I mean, it's pretty high.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers, but I just know that it's far more common in children with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
And, Anya presented like very few symptoms at all. We were shocked when we found out. So where dairy was rather unpleasant for a long time before we figured that one out. But so besides nutrition and diet, what's another area that parents need to be looking at?
Well, and I think of nutrition and diet at a very deep level, down at a core level. I think you work up from there. Let's look at our sensory system. Let's look at the amount of movement we get. People forget that the sensory system and the sensory motor system are important for optimal alertness. And it's very fatiguing if you're hypersensitive to certain input.
Yeah.
People forget, so, but then also certain other types of input is going to increase the ability to stay alert. So deep pressure input, the proprioceptive system, the vestibular system. These are very deep systems. Remind people, for 9 months, the baby was in the womb, getting lots of deep pressure to the body, the joints and muscles. It's very calming. This is why you swaddle babies. It's very calming for systems. This is why throughout the world, in just about every culture, you have a massage, because deep pressure to the body is calming. And are we doing the proper things to calm our children down, giving them the right input? We have swings in just about every culture too, because swinging and rocking. Baby was in the womb, and with the deep pressure, walking around, getting the gentle rocking motion. I think we all just want to go back some days. Yeah.
Well, then if you pull that into the classroom, so for example, I have a typical child, but he is very sensory seeking. So he doesn't walk down the stairs, he bounds down the stairs.
Or rolls down.
Or rolls, yeah.
Yes.
And he's almost 15. But that's just, he always sounds like an elephant. He's the kid that will stand at the top of the stairs. Because we have two really sensory kiddos, our two girls. So we have a crash pad in our basement, and he'll stand at the top of the stairs and crash into the crash pad. But he happens to be homeschooled, which is great. But some of those kids, that's really hard. So he can bounce on a ball while he does his schoolwork, or run around the room while he memorizes stuff. But these kids are now put in a classroom, and that's really challenging.
Yeah, we are losing that sense of the need for movement. We keep cutting recess. I like the book Spark, which reminds us that movement and exercise is important for alertness. I put in a lot of plans, individual education plans and 504 plans that I recommend. We're going to have to move this kid sometimes every 20 minutes. And I asked for a sitting desk and a standing desk in the classroom, so you can sort of control that they can move between those two spots, because some will just get up and walk off. It's like, no, these are your spots. You can go between these two spots. Stand here or work here, and if you need to go someplace else, come talk to me. How are we going to give them the movement they need? The therapy bands around the legs of the chair so they can push on them, get some deep pressure. I had a teacher once tell me, he says, well, I put the therapy bands around every chair in my room and my special ed room, and it's like dueling banjos in there. It's starting to calm down. Any strategy you pick, you got to see if it works for that child, and you have to give it a little time. You can't give them a therapy ball to sit on and think they're going to sit down and start working.
No.
You got to give them a little time to goof off and then learn to work with that strategy.
That's how my daughter starts her day every day. She comes in and she gets on a therapy ball and she bounces and bounces and bounces and bounces. And that's how they start her day. Then they move on to what she needs to get done.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because Nicole used to, the first thing that they would do is take her to the swing, to a platform swing, and she would have some time in the platform swing and then go back to the classroom. And they don't do that anymore, but that used to be her thing too.
Yeah, and you'd like to treat enough that the neurology matures and can handle it more. And once again, highly individual. Some people will always need more movement in their day. And they pick careers that involve a lot of movement. I always tell people, we will build our careers on our strengths.
Interesting.
Not our weaknesses. And so people who need a lot of movement, they drift into a job that has a lot of movement.
Robin, something that you guys talk about in the book, just because we're mentioning this right now, is that schools provide some supports, but the reality is that oftentimes the supports at school, that's not enough.
I always feel like the school's job is to try to move your child forward academically. That is their responsibility. And sometimes they're working down underneath with the sensory strategies or with basic language skills to be able to do, and with behavior to move that forward. But that's their job, to move your child forward academically. It is not their job to treat your child as a whole person. Their job is to get them through academics. And so it's up to the parent to realize that the school's plan is not going to be enough in most cases, because they have a limited responsibility, which is different from you as the parent. Some schools, I think, can do more and will do more, but very often you are having to round out your child's needs at home.
Well, the perfect example of this is when you're looking at therapies like physical therapy or occupational therapy, they will only address those things that affect the classroom directly. So a lot of us, including me, get therapies outside of school to address the issues that have more to do with daily living and at home and things of that sort.
Yeah, there's school skills and there's life skills.
Exactly.
And the school is not always doing those big life skills.
Right. Yeah.
Robin, can you talk about because I read that there are the order of treatment of therapeutic approaches can actually be key in many situations. Like, what does that mean, the order of treatment or therapeutic approaches?
Luckily, we've been sort of talking about that a lot. The big example is like the dairy example. If we think it's making you foggy, if you're trying to treat attention issues while this child is still on dairy, you are just driving with the brakes on. So let's start at the bottom. With have we looked at these? Do we have any symptoms? And as we know, we all have said, we didn't think we had any symptoms, and we were shocked to find out that there was celiac disease. But exploring at those deep levels and making sure we have smoothed out, nutritionally elimination diet, those sorts of things have been ruled out. If you tell me a child has eczema, if you tell me a child is chronically congested and doesn't sleep well at night, I want to look at those issues first and clear those first. I have a lot of parents who are I've had parents who are trying to treat a reading problem when there's a speech language problem that's the major source of the reading problem. And I had to tell one parent who was just really pushing for more and more reading work. And finally, the speech therapist told me, had a really good explanation. Why teach them to read if there's no language bank to put the words into? You've got to start with language skills and then build the reading into it. So understanding where the problems sort of originate and then working down there and building back up is where you've kind of got to do it. Parents are often, and teachers, everybody's often treating at the top.
That makes total sense.
And we have to dig out what's like that tip of the iceberg, and you go underwater and there's this huge issue. going on that you have to, that are not as evident, and we have to deal with those first.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So how do you do that?
That's why we wrote the book.
Yeah.
And put that checklist in as you're digging to find out what else might be contributing.
Yeah. So we all need
Because
to get
very
the book.
often said most.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would be great. But yeah, because it's very hard. I mean, Kim Gangwish is one of my co-authors or co-editors of this book, because we had a lot of other professionals contribute. But we sort of laugh at, why did you write the book? It's because we were spending so much time on the phone with clients trying to help them find their starting point. And very often I wasn't the starting point, or Kim wasn't the starting point. It's like, really, as we talk about this, I would start over here, and so that's why we wrote the book, is like, we need to help parents find where their starting points might be.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And it differs from kid to kid, so it's hard to say, here's your singular answer.
Right.
Start here.
Of course.
Because every child is so individual. I mean, even within a family, you even have different, biologists in some way, because everybody works different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes,
and I think another example of that is, and I think a number of us with children with special needs can relate to this. You tell someone your child has XYZ and they give you all the magic cures for it, right? I knew someone who, as a parent, we want to help our kids. So you go try that idea and you're like, well, that didn't work. And my example is gluten. Everyone said gluten helps behaviors. Gluten helps behaviors. So we went off of gluten for a year. It didn't touch them,
Mm-hmm.
So every child is so different. I'm glad if you had a miracle cure. It doesn't mean it's everybody's miracle cure.
Exactly. And we do discuss that when we're discussing the complementary alternative approaches, is everybody wants something to work, and something to work big. Yeah.
Yes.
We really want that. And that's why I remind parents, sometimes we're just going to do 20% here, 20% here, 10% here. I tell parents a lot of times, for my kids who organize through oral work, to put out a bowl of popcorn at homework. I said, it's not like popcorn's going to fix your problem, but it might buy you 5 to 10%, because crunchy is organizing for some, chewing is organizing for some people, and a bowl of popcorn makes everything better. Just a little bit. But yes, knowing where to start, and then it's rare to find a singular 90% do this and you're 90% fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just important to recognize that. And sometimes what you're dealing with is a very unique learning style, which could be a wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
It just may not fit in the classroom very well. And
Right.
so some of it is honoring your child as a unique person, creative, curious, and say, you don't have to put my little square peg in that round hole. And you're not going to fit.
At what point do you pull medication into the conversation?
I pull medication in on safety issues, that it's hard to keep this child safe.
Yes.
This one darts out into the street. I had a child, mother told me this story of a child coming home with a bright blue mouth. He had drunk the neighbor's chemistry Saturday dare. And when we have a strong safety issue, and it's like in the attention realm, then often medication may be what we need to at least bridge us over a rough spot. And one little girl in first grade who was walking out of the classroom, walking down the hall, walking out of school, showing up at the front door of her house. Mom, I walked home. Not telling a soul.
Wow.
6 years of age. And so when we can't keep you safe, unless we can find some other way to do it, then maybe a medication trial will get us there. Happiness, quality of life. Say this child's not a strong safety issue, but he's coming home from school, I'm stupid. Everybody can do it but me. And this child's quality of life is greatly impacted, and we have not found another way to intervene. Then do we consider medication in that situation?
I think those are both great
examples.
Answers.
Good examples too.
The quality of life thing. I have a friend with a son with autism, and they were very against medication, and that's finally what the psychiatrist said to them. Let's look at quality of life here. And sometimes we're so against the medication that we're almost okay with not having the quality of life as long as we don't have the medication. Like what I found with my with ADHD, my daughter with Down syndrome has ADHD, and we did ABA for a long time, trying to help her control her behaviors and her impulsivity. And what I found was that a little bit of medication made that ABA incredibly effective for her.
I made that point too. Sometimes we use medication to help us bridge through a learning skill. We can't pay attention well enough to get these skills in place, but medication may bridge us over that. And then you can decide whether, all right, we can come off of it.
Right.
So, and then I tell people, you're often committing to not to the medication, but to a trial with the medication.
Yes.
You're not committing to forever. If it doesn't work, if it's not a good fit, then don't use it.
Right. Exactly.
It's a trial in those situations where we really haven't found another way in.
Yeah.
Yep. So we talked about this before. So let's say that I take the book and I go through the checklist and I see that there's, maybe speech and language issues that need to be addressed that the school is not going to do. As a parent, how do I go about it? I mean, how do I find a professional that is actually going to be able to help my child?
We actually cover that in the back of each of the chapters about speech and language, about reading disabilities, about attention. What are the organizations, if you don't know where to call, that might direct you to a qualified provider? And then what questions would you ask that provider? And speech and language being a very good example. People don't realize that there's a difference between speech and language.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yes, speech is your ability to form the sounds to make your words. But language, expressive language, is can I produce meaningful communication? Mm-hmm. Receptive language is can I understand what you meant when you spoke to me? Well, speech and language are two different things, and some people specialize in speech. Some people specialize in language, some therapists. And you have to ask those questions. Are you a speech therapist? Are you a language therapist? Can you do both? Mm-hmm. This is what my child is presenting with. Have you worked with these types of children? It's very intimidating to try to find the right people for your child. You don't want to waste your child's time. You don't want to poke the bear. There's only so much therapy you can throw at kids before they get sick of going to therapy.
Yeah.
And then you don't want to waste your money and your time.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked a little bit about this, and we actually talked a little bit more when we had the podcast on mental health issues for parents. But I think as parents, we need to be brave enough, or not confrontational, but if there's a therapist that's not working, we can't worry about hurting someone's feelings or having that rough conversation. We need to, for a child's sake, to be able to say it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And I think to say it nicely, at this time, we're taking a break from this because it does not seem to be, helping. We want to pull back, take a look at things, and get back with you, or maybe find a different type of provider. You don't even have to add that point if you're not that kind of person. It is hard, really, for women. We want everybody to be happy with us.
Yes.
We don't want them to be unhappy with themselves. My gosh, we have trouble with this.
I wish I would have had that language, because we had a situation where we were seeing a therapist, and I don't know if it was a speech or a language therapist, now that you made the distinction. But I remember going in, and the way she talked to my daughter was so tiring to listen. And I remember the very last day where we were there, my daughter was sitting on my lap and she kept showing a book and going, "Nicole, do you see what's here? Nicole," and she kept talking like that, trying. Mm-hmm. And I started sitting and I kept sliding down and closing my eyes until I realized that I kind of had fallen asleep, and my daughter was just staring at the book blank, and I realized this is not working. And when I woke up, the first thing I said, "I'm sorry, this is not working. I'm falling asleep here. She's completely checked out." And that's all I said. And she just looked at me, and I said, "Well, I mean, we can't keep doing this, and
yeah, and I think that's an okay thing to say too. It feels a little more like, oh, I've hurt her feelings.
Ellen doesn't care.
Yeah, well, you get to that point.
Sometimes.
Yeah, but yeah, but you do care. But on the other hand, not all practitioners are created equal, and you will get some who are not strong, who will have to learn to be stronger, or who maybe work with a particular type of need better than others, and they're going to have to learn that and specialize.
Mm-hmm.
We had an occupational therapist join the OT practice in my office, and he had been a hand therapist with adults, and he joined a practice full of small children with sensory motor issues. He did not last very long.
I bet.
He had to go back to adult hands.
Robin, let me ask you something, because I know some people have been in this situation. When my daughters were little, we lived in a very, very small town. So there really weren't any pediatric therapists. And in order for us to go and receive therapy, it was either go and see someone who, like you said, doesn't have a lot of experience with children, or we had to drive an hour and a half to go see a therapist. So what is your advice to parents who find themselves in that situation?
That is hard, because you do want the best therapist for your kids, not just for their good experience, but also financially it can be a waste of time to do poor therapy. Find the best you can find, even if they're a long way off, and say, work with me. I can only get here once every 2 weeks or once a month. What can I be doing at home? There's more and more video link ups for therapy happening. And I know some people doing things by video. And so really, you may have to push them to be more creative than they've been. But I think you have to try to be creative for your kids. And so I would do that. I would say, okay, what's the best I can find? Well, I nearby and visit them, and then ask if we can set up a situation like that.
So you're saying a little bit of quality therapy is worth it instead of a whole lot of therapy that isn't going to work anyway.
Well, a little bit of quality therapy, but with a strong home program. That they are working with what you're doing at home. So hopefully you're not getting weekly therapy with the best therapist you can find, but you may be getting monthly direct with some indirect or some video conferencing about, watch me do this with my child. Am I doing it right?
Mm-hmm.
And see if that will work, because it is tough when you're far away from good therapists.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and not everybody has that.
Yeah, and it's finding the right people, I think, is the hardest thing, and you're always questioning yourself. Really, I think when you've landed with someone good, but until then, like, oh, is this the best it could be?
Right.
So I wrote, I had another couple questions that I wanted to run by you. First of all, like, one of them is, why are so many teachers, why is it that so many teachers seem to dismiss warning signs? Like, I've been in a situation where we're seeing something at home, that maybe we are suspecting a learning disability. And every time we bring it up at school, it's, oh no, it's fine.
A lot of kids do that.
A lot of kids do that.
I find, and I had this come up the other day at a meeting with a bunch of educators, is very often the teacher in the regular education classroom is not trained in learning disabilities and has very limited training in learning disabilities. And they have a lot on their plate in terms of standards assessments and things like that. And so they simply don't always have the training. And as we all know who have raised kids, and then have raised kids with any special needs, is all children do some things occasionally, and then some children do that thing a lot. And so the teacher can say, in all honesty, I see a lot of kids do that all the time, are not progressing. A lot of kids don't progress in reading. They don't really get started until they're 8 or 9 years old. Yes, but we have a family history of reading disability. So I don't think we're just going to jumpstart suddenly at 8. And so helping them understand that big picture but they're not always trained in it. And I do think it happens a lot, particularly with how busy they are. There's a lot of demand on them.
So here's another question for you, because a lot of parents also find themselves in a situation where you're presenting some of those things at school, and school will keep saying, no, they either don't fall far behind enough, to the point that there's no supports, there's no services. It's like you didn't even say anything at all. So what can a parent do?
I think if you strongly suspect that your child has a learning disability, simply go into that classroom, go to the principal or the director of special ed and say, I strongly suspect my child has a learning disability. I would like to sign the paperwork today to initiate that process for getting my child evaluated. And that is your legal right. And but then the teacher has also a point, like in some school districts, if you're not behind by, like, I know the rule of thumb in Denver in the old standards are you had to be 2 years academically delayed.
Right. Yep, it's the same. Services. I think it's the same now.
And most of our parents who are trying to be on top of it aren't going to let their child get 2 years behind.
Right. And
sometimes and so that's point, sometimes you need to go to the outside evaluation and get a more formal diagnosis. That's another thing in our state, is that districts can't often give a diagnosis. They can just identify an academic delay. They can't even say why that's delayed. They don't know. But a good outside evaluator can make those, I think it's behind for these reasons, which is actually more helpful than just being behind, to kind of know why. But going out and getting that outside evaluation, getting it identified, then asking from there for a plan, for at least a 504 plan, and then say, bring your evidence, and often it's school-based evidence. This is behind. What are we going to do about it? And nicely as possible, but what happens in this situation? And then, and really very calmly make them walk you through their plan. It's tough now because there's RTI, response to intervention, which they can implement without evaluating. And that's extra help within the classroom. It is documented, but it's not as formal as a full evaluation to see what might help. And sometimes they'll do RTI and keep them inching along. And so it is, the parents got to stay on top of things. We do talk educational advocacy in the book. We do talk the ins and outs of getting services for your child, because parents sometimes get told things that aren't quite correct. And I don't think the school personnel, the person who told is trying to be misleading. It's actually maybe often their understanding of things. So it is very good to.
I was going to say, it sounds like the book is incredibly comprehensive.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I do need to get a copy.
Yeah.
It's about 400 pages. It's quite the little tome.
Yeah, yeah.
We had to actually take out chapters.
But I love that you said that's not overwhelming, because you said at the beginning, you identify the areas you really need to address. So if it's not speech and language, you'd skip that chapter. So it's not like you're sitting down and reading 400 pages front to back. It's more of a resource. Would you say that?
Yeah, it's more of a resource.
Yeah.
And you can read the chapters that apply to you. The chapters we tried to actually make relatively short. Not as short as I quite wanted, because it turns out we all had something more to say. But short enough to define the elements of that challenge, and then define how to find the proper, what are the standards of care? What's the standard of care for attention deficit disorder? What are the complementing and alternative approaches that are emerging? How do you find qualified practitioners? What questions do you ask them? So very pragmatic at the end of each chapter for figuring out how to move forward. And the same with the advocacy chapter of how to work with school districts. And then a reminder that you are the case manager for your child when your child has learning challenges. As you know, there's no one keeping an eye on your child like you are. And so you learn to be the case manager.
Without a doubt.
We just recently did a podcast on building strong relationships with your IEP team.
Yeah. And I find schools for the most part, I only run into occasional situations where things have gone negative. For the most part,
Right.
schools are trying,
Yes.
but very often they're trying with limited resources.
Right.
You know, it's busy,
Right.
and you've got to. I tell people, be the nicest squeaky wheel you can be.
Yes. Yep.
Mhm. Because we want, I mean, for us as parents, we want to have the school on our side. So if something does come up, they know we're not the parents who are going to fight, but they know that we're parents who are willing to work with the school,
Mhm.
understanding that there's limited resources, but also understanding that there is also a certain standard of services that they do need to provide.
Yes.
So
Yes, and you can continue to work creatively and with the school. And sometimes you have the best ideas because you know your child so well. So
Yes.
don't be afraid to put that forward. Is there any way we can do this? You know, can we try that? And sometimes when there's goals in the IEP, I will sit and ask, whose responsibility is that? You know, just to know, is this the primary teacher's responsibility? It'll say like an accommodation will be repeat instructions to this child to ensure understanding. And that sounds fine, doesn't it? So I have to ask
Right.
the teacher who's got 28
Right.
small children, do you have time to do that? Because I don't know how I would do that if I had 28 small children to be monitoring to get over to this one every time and repeat the instructions. So I do try to, you hear these things and you try to be very nice. Does that work with your classroom setup?
Mm-hmm.
Just find out. If it's not going to happen, it's like, I understand that'd be hard. Can we think of some other way to approach this?
Yeah.
So you have to be very active listener and very mentally creative. Like, can I envision that in her classroom or his classroom? Yeah. And do we think that's going to work?
those are really great questions. Actually, I
know.
to ask her in IEPs, and I'll have that in the episode notes. So
I've been to a lot of IEP meetings, including my own child's. And so mine had an oral motor apraxia. And I actually did a lot of volunteer work at school just to have my ear to the ground. And how can I be helpful to these people who I am counting on supporting my child?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I realize I don't have tons of flexibility. I'm a working mom, but I found some time. I'd sort the lost and found, and people were so appreciative. But people would pass, and I would get to talk to teachers, and it was helpful. You know.
Excellent. Now, Ellen, you're going to post a link to the book, correct?
Yeah, and actually, I was going to say, as we're wrapping up, you know, I will have a link to the book, and actually, it is childdecoded.com. That's the link to the book, and I will have that. Also, for Robin's website, it's robinmcavoy.com. Again, I'll have a direct link to her site. So if anybody wants to get a hold of her. Now, Robin also wrote another book that's called Buddy. It's a children's book, and it's a book on dyslexia. And your daughter illustrated it?
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Daughter who had apraxia could draw beautifully from an early age. And so she illustrated her first book. Here, we'll hold it up. Yeah, see if we can see it. When this was before high school, she did this, and
wow,
it's been a great little book. We use it as a fundraiser to fund reading remediation in low-income kids, and we got a lovely endorsement from Sally Shaywitz at Yale, who wrote Overcoming Dyslexia. She's like, this is perfect. So that was cool. A great thing.
So that's what we're gonna do. So. Again, we talked about learning disabilities and really identifying challenges and how to work through them. I think, Erin, you and I are convinced we need a copy of the book.
Yes.
Yes, and I think everybody will want one too. So we're going to have those links available. And a reminder, the freebie is the first chapter of the book, which is CJ's story, one of the authors, her son's story. And it's ellenstumble.com/episode 27, the number. Scroll down to the bright orange button, click on yes, send me CJ's story, and that's going to go directly in your inbox. And I'm going to have all the information available in that same page for how to get a hold of Robin. Links to the book. I'll have a direct link to Amazon for people who are ready to just go ahead and buy the book.
Thank you.
And anything else, Erin?
No, that was fantastic.
I was going to say, what are you supposed to tell them? Remember, I don't say
Ellen,
it.
You want me to say, you want me to pester them now is what you want.
I do.
Leave us a review.
Yes.
On Stitcher or
What
iTunes.
that sign language was that you were doing. For those of you that aren't watching the video, that was quite some sign language there.
Yes. Leave us a review. And Robin, thank you so much for joining us. This was really very informative.
Incredibly. Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
It was a great pleasure to be with y'all.
Yes. And next episode is all about surviving the summer, and it's our last episode of the season 1.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh,
Yes.
congratulations to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So I would say until next week, we'll see
See you
everybody.
later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.